So, hello and welcome. Almost sounded like a broadcaster person. Hello and welcome to the 6 o'clock evening news. All we have right now for you is positive news. There is a magazine called The Positive News. But let's just see if we can just notice what's here. Notice what's present for you right now. Presence is one of the qualities of self. It's one of the 5 Ps. And as we spoke about in the meetings last week, Bessel van der Kolk says that the hallmark of trauma is our inability to be in the present moment, here and now. So through trauma, we become disembodied, dissociated, and we kind of become a bit stuck, not flowing in the present. So here's an invite. Here's an invite to try out this thing called presence or being. Notice what happens for you when you make a U-turn, when you dive into your inner world. And for some parts, that's really easy. Maybe some parts are so pleased that you're here. Oh, thank God that this person's got an hour for me now, that they can attend to me and look at me, delight in me, get to know me. And there might be some other parts, thoughts, feelings that say something like, oh God, I really don't want you to look at me. I feel ashamed. I'm hiding a lot of stuff. I'm keeping a closed lid on it. I'd so much rather that you were outside in the external world. So just notice which parts are absolutely rejoicing in your presencing. Which parts are kind of trying to pull you out of presence by going into analyzing, meaning making, storytelling. Or maybe even thinking, I'm just in the wrong place. This meeting isn't for me. Just notice what is here. And the simplest way to find presence or to tune to presence is to just notice your breath. And notice who else is with you noticing your breath. Is there a part that is maybe judging your breath? Maybe for this part, the breath is too shallow. Maybe the body feels too tight, too tense. Notice who's co-witnessing, or which part. And we simply roll out the welcome mat for all these parts that are cohabiting the inner space. And see if you can attune to the body. If you take a scan from the top of your head all the way down to your feet, just notice what is here. Stopping, if you can, at the chakra points. So from the crown to the third eye, to the throat, down into the heart, to the solar plexus, into the sacral, and down to the root. And imagine growing roots from your root chakra down through the length of your legs and out through the bottom of your feet and into the earth's core, providing that sense of groundedness, stability, belonging. And this very brief scan of the body, of the chakra point, is a really fantastic diagnostic of what parts are present. you will begin to notice, if you do this scan every morning and every evening, you will begin to notice which parts hang out where in your body. You might find that your managers hang out in your shoulders and your neck. You might find your inner critic hangs out somewhere around your third eye. You might find there's a legacy burden in your throat. And research shows that really very early childhood trauma tends to afflict the lower three chakras the most: the root, the sacral, and the solar plexus. That's where our youngest, most tender parts are. And if we get some blockage in the lower three, that automatically leads to blockage in the upper four as well. So everything starts with the hips, with the sitting bones, with the belly. And the belly is where those digestive juices are. Not only digesting and processing food, sorting out what's useful and what's not. It also helps us digest emotional content. The Greeks, ancient Greeks, felt there was an immense amount of intelligence and wisdom in the stomach. And of course, science is now catching up. The microbiome, the gut flora, has a direct effect on the brain, on the mind. Everything is linked, interconnected. So can we let the belly be loose? Can you let the belly be soft like a rag doll? And if not, what is that a diagnostic of? What is here that is preventing you from softening through the belly? And if it feels right, maybe gentle hands on the belly. Maybe circular little strokes, little massage on the belly, just tenderness, tender, loving touch from yourself for yourself. But when there are parts that are holding on to stuck energy, unable to move through, those parts are then not able to use energy for creativity. Sometimes maybe you've had a similar experience. Sometimes in therapy, we can actually feel a very deep, somatic, palpable shift in energy when we've unburdened, when we've resolved a piece of trauma. It can feel like a weight has been lifted. And for those of you who enjoy moving your body in various ways, some of the best moves are the poses that really allow the hips to open up. And I invite you now, if it feels right, to maybe lie down on the floor and open up your hips, or go into a deep squat, or whatever feels right now. Or just a cross-legged seated posture, just to open up the hips a little bit more and just notice. Going back to that presence, what happens? What happens to your belly, to the hips, the sitting bones, the breath, the heart, when you gently allow yourself to open up the hips? Very tender place for a lot of people. So go easy. And how about bringing in playfulness? We've mentioned presence, one of the qualities of self. Playfulness is the other quality, the other P. How about as you're experimenting with your hips, maybe if you're lying on your back on the floor in happy baby pose, imagine rolling from one side to the other. Playfulness. Wherever you are on your journey, maybe it isn't possible right now. But if it is, how would it be to smile as you're exploring the hip area? And notice what happens when you smile. So the journey of healing doesn't have to be a totally serious one. We can bring in a quality of playfulness, creativity, joy, laughter. In fact, because your mics are muted, no one's going to hear you. How would it feel to laugh right now? And notice what happens. And maybe the point of your journey that you're at, maybe laughter is not an appropriate thing right now, and that's great. That's good too. But if it's possible, if it feels manageable, just let out a little chuckle. I'm finding myself, I have one hand on my heart center and the other hand on my lower belly, and just gently rocking over such gentle micro movements. If you ever do find yourself in overwhelm, actually coming back to presence, coming back to the breath, coming back to the body, hand on heart, hand on the belly. These are the basics. This is the less glamorous part of non-dual healing. This is the part that very prominent in the teachings, in the Tantra yoga teachings that I spent a decade in. Attuned, felt sense, presence in the body. Absolutely vital to embodied awakening. Really vital. Some Bessel van der Kolk, in his famous book, says that the body keeps the score. But the body also has the wisdom to bring us back into presence. So there's medicine in the wound, in the trauma. That which pulls us into a trauma vortex also pulls us into an equal and opposite counter vortex, into the body, into presence. And because we disembody during trauma, we forget to notice and attune to this counter vortex that invites us back into our body. We're very fearful of being in the body. Should the bad thing happen again? So one of the biggest tips that I invite, or that I give out, is just to sit in full presence with the body for 5 minutes. 5 minutes a day. And then work it up to 10, 20, half an hour. And if you haven't got 5 minutes, then I recommend you sit for an hour a day. So just sitting with yourself might be one of the most important aspects of being able to self-soothe, to self-regulate, to come back home. And for some parts, the notion of home within may feel like such an alien concept. Do you feel at home in your body? Does your breath feel precious and dear and unconditionally loving? You see, even when you're asleep, when the parts have just softened to a point where you're not aware of any parts whatsoever. The breath carries on breathing you. The heartbeat carries on beating lovingly, willingly. This is the love. This is the love that's always here. No matter what the content of the mind is. So presence and the breath and the body are really wonderful ways into meeting self. And I always say the self is closer than your breath, more intimate than your next inhale. Can you imagine? Can you imagine self more intimate than even your breath, than even your heartbeat? Can you imagine that your breath and your heartbeat is made of self? The very essence of self loses itself in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the mind, in the body, willingly, lovingly. And as a female growing up in the Western culture, I haven't always been best as of friends with my body. I haven't always seen it as an ally. Sometimes the mind and the body had big clashes, big fallouts, very polarized. But now they dance as lovers, intertwined, inseparable, precious, innocent, beautiful, joyful, blissful, delightful. And it's not because anything has changed about the physical aspect of my body. My appearance hasn't changed. All that has happened is that I see the body mind as not separate from self, from unconditional love. That's all that's changed. I didn't have to go to the gym, didn't have to exercise, eat any any kind of diet, or it just, when we come home to self, the body is naturally beautiful. That personally was a big legacy burden for me, to really fall in love, or rather uncover the love that was always there. I needed to peel back the layers of hatred. And this is why in IFS we say that this is not an additive model. We're not here to build the muscle of self. We're not here to build the muscle of anything other than taking away that which is not self, and helping these layers see that ultimately everything is self. So we're starting with the premise that our nature, our essence, is unconditional love, fulfillment, happiness, peace. That's the baseline. And then, through no fault of our own, over the top of this baseline, we acquired and accrued burdens. And these are the extra filtering and layering that can obscure the effortless self. And of course, the natural essence of each part is self. And maybe about 20 years ago, when me and my body were having battles, and I'd look in the mirror, I would notice the things about me that I didn't like. And now I see that when we look again, look deeper, still deeper, still another layer in, and another, and another. Keep looking. Ah, there it is. Oh my gosh, there is the gleaming light. There I am, the I am. Not that I am this or that, it's I am. Pure particle self. This practice is about deep looking, deep feeling, deep presence. deep witnessing, deep compassion. And it takes courage. It takes courage to look deeply, to look past, when we're facing our loved one and they're speaking from a burdened part. And maybe they're being a bit aggressive. The greatest challenge in that moment is to look deeply through the burdens and see the self. And the same thing with our parts. When the inner critic starts to speak to us in our inner world through the sub-vocal voice, or through images, or through body pains, it's important to look deeply to see the call for love. In A Course in Miracles, we say that everything is either an expression of love or a call for love. So when we look very deeply, we can transcend or pass through or feel through the layers of pain to the pure love. That which we are at our deepest core. So if you like, when we do these practices, scanning the chakra points, becoming aware of the breath of the body, we're acquiring X-ray vision. Another word for that is interoception. Perceiving within. These are the practices that I engage in every day. Scanning the chakra points. Letting the belly be loose and soft. Opening up the hips. I just heard my daughter whisper, "Love you, mummy." Bless her heart. So these are really fantastic biomarkers, diagnostic little tools for figuring out whereabouts are we. Recently, a dear colleague of mine who's a homeopath and an anthropologist, we had a conversation, and I want to share this with you because I think it's a really beautiful tip. He said one of his teachers said that whenever we're sort of uncertain where to go next, which part to work with, What is it that needs to be attended to next? There's a lovely little practice of at each of the chakra points, or maybe placing your hand on the heart to start off with, saying, I am worthy of unconditional love. And just pausing and listening, interoception, listening to what the body answers. If there's any pushback, or if it's hard to say those words to begin with. And notice who or what comes back at each of the chakra points as you say, I am worthy of unconditional love, or I am unconditional love. You know, it takes about a minute to scan through each of the chakra points. It's a really fantastic way of seeing, where do I need to go next? Which part needs me? I am unconditional love. What happens when you hear that? You are unconditional love. Hmm. I hope that was useful. I hope some parts felt nourished by your tender, gentle care, your inward looking, deep looking. And maybe if it feels right, sending a thank you note to the parts that were here. And maybe if there's any parts that need a little bit more tender care, setting an intention to go back to those parts in your own time or in your next therapy session. You are unconditional love, and you are worthy of unconditional love.